areas to receive any confirmation if my campaigns are working or not. So now we've got these tools to understand the cultural differences, which is the what and the where. Let's just talk about how we earn our way into people's lives. And what are those behaviors? We told you right at the beginning, over 50% of the 30,000 people we talked to, their biggest fear is that their loss of local culture. So basically what that means is that culture is a very precious thing. So a brand's behavior, brands that earn their way into culture, question, how do they behave? They behave in a way that helps protect what is precious. If culture is so precious, they help enrich it and protect it. And that means we have to ask questions differently. How many of us over here, when we work on international campaigns, or even a different market, think about, does this work in India? Will this work in China? Will this work in Germany? And the new reality begs a different perspective. Rather than ask the question, does this work in India, in Peru? The question is, does it work for Peru? Does it work for India? Will it help enrich that culture? When we look at examples of brands that do this really, really well, we came across an example of Coca-Cola that behaved in a way that truly enriched the culture in Peru. You will see the video, but the story in 3 seconds is very beautiful. It is a country where people are very happy, but when you look at statistics, they don't report the same way. It's also a country where you can smile in your national ID card, but people don't. And Coca-Cola believes, their truth is that if you smile, it's a sign of happiness, more people should smile, it's a sign of optimism and well-being, and we want to spread that. And they did something that truly enriched the culture there and became really, really iconic. I'll play the film.
Coca-Cola presents the Happy ID. Since you have to take your own pictures to make your ID, we installed free photo booths in strategic points all over Peru. To have your picture taken, you didn't have to push any button. You just needed to smile. In the first month of the activation, 90% of the IDs made by the Peruvian government were Happy IDs. The Happy ID even became a reward card. You could obtain substantial discounts just by showing your Happy ID. The conversation about Peruvians' happiness and unhappiness became a huge topic, spreading happiness all over the region.
How beautiful is that? In fact, when you think about it, you might ask yourself, so hey, enriching cultures are nice to have. You know what? It's not just a nice to have anymore. Increasingly, it has become a business imperative. Lawmakers in developing countries, emerging countries, and established countries are getting increasingly tired of global corporations that come in there and they say, you know what? You can't just come in here and bring your stuff if you don't really improve the lives of the communities that live in this world. So that has become a business imperative. In fact, the CEO report at PricewaterhouseCoopers says that the governments of many, well, I've already told you this, what they talk about it is, if you do this well, it can protect your license to operate. So it's almost like ensuring the future of your business. So we talked about the first two pillars. Let's talk about the third one very quickly, about inspiring creative that travels.
So at Truth Central, we've been tracking some cultural waves, and it's probably no surprise that cultural waves travel in really unique and dynamic ways. I mean, so Latino beauty standards reflected in Europe. We see that Nollywood is having an audience in North America. And of course, Nordic noir, The Killing, and The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo has infected the entire globe. So when we think about cultural influences and cultural properties, we like to think about the unique ways in which these properties travel. So when we think about Bollywood, we've been able to track sort of the over time series, 10 years of the spread of Bollywood. And what's really interesting, I'm going to show you this map and then I'm going to tell you something that's really important about it. So you see that spread of Bollywood from India, you see that North America has a huge audience for Bollywood. Well, this is in fact really a really interesting and rewarding point to recognize that 1/3 of Bollywood's revenues come from North America. And in fact, in places like Cameroon and Nigeria, Bollywood is increasingly popular because of the ways in which certain values like family and romance are expressed in this rosy-colored world. So you see that these patterns, again, must be recognized the way to understand the ways in which creative ideas travel. When we think about something like Korean, everything K-pop, K-drama, K-music, Gangnam Style, all these sort of trends that have sort of hit the universe, let's look at the way that's moved across the world. So we've all got Gangnam Style, it's clear, we're all knowing what that means. But what's really interesting about Korean and K-pop is that the Korean government has actually subsidized and paid for subtitles for Korean dramas so that they actually penetrate Latin American Spanish-speaking world. So there's a real investment in getting these creative ideas out there. Lastly, we think about a property like Doctor Who. This is a really old property. Since 1964, the idea has existed. And when we look at the sort of ways in which it's moved, you see this sort of like Anglo-Saxon American, but then we see this huge global spread. And what's really interesting about that is when we spoke to the executive producer of Doctor Who at Cannes last year, he told us that the magic of his success, the real reason for its success, is because he's committed to an essential idea and he's been really true to this universal truth that drives his property. So he hasn't adapted or transformed his property over the period of time that Doctor Who has been in existence.
So that brings us towards close to the end of this presentation. And, you know, like there is no formula, obviously, for inspiring creative that travels. This is, like I said, a whole section unto itself. But, you know, there are a few principles. We kind of just said, hey, if you were to kind of put a bumper sticker on this whole section and build one kind of a simple approach on a page as to what are some of those little common steps that we all have to be mindful of when we're trying to build ideas and stories that will travel. Really important, obviously, start with a very powerful truth, your truth, people's truth, and hopefully a place where the two can intersect. Ideally with something that, you know, understand how that plays out in the world, and at the same time, it's important to deliver that in everything that the brand does and says, you know, so we're living in a world where much more, it's like, I like to think of it, I read it somewhere, I wish I wrote it, it's like it's no longer about ads, it's about acts. And it's beautiful because, you know, it says, it's like no more what you say, it's how you behave. So both saying and doing are equally important, and make sure that that mission, that purpose, that truth comes through in everything we say and do. And finally, I think this is the best, most important part. We like calling this iterate to great. So if you take something away from here, take that. Because that is the recipe, if you ask me, in my humble opinion, is to always be in a state where you iterate to a point of greatness. You put something, you recalibrate, you improvise, you change. Because you know what? You can't do that in this world today. There's no point getting too precious and too hung up about the idea and being so inflexible. So we can iterate our way into greatness. Lastly, the way to kind of do this, so one of our clients asked us, well, you know, this is really great, but what kind of questions can we ask ourselves if you're trying to build stories that will travel across the world? And we said, you know what? Start with universal questions. Sometimes they can just help start a conversation. So if we're in the business of connection, what kind of stories do we want to build? Ask ourselves, will it help someone feel closer to the things and people that they care about? One currency might be happiness, one currency might be connectivity, one currency might be something else. Zappos is a shoe delivery service that does it well, and Coca-Cola does this exceedingly well in the world. Love, will it help someone feel passion or romance? Or will it help someone feel some sense of awe at the world? It's not just the prerogative of travel companies, promising a sense of adventure and promise. Will it help someone feel like they're part of something bigger, bigger than themselves? Will it help someone feel that they have accomplished sometimes something big? And I think, you know, the most successful brands are able to do all these, do more than one of them equally well. Beginning with medium, message, story, channel, they do all of these really, really quite well. So, to end, what we have is an operating framework of how global or local we are. We have a point of view on what kind of behaviors should we be looking at and emulating if we want to navigate this world successfully, and also a view on ideas and brands that do indeed travel. To sum it up, these are the three principles. You've seen this in all the material. You saw this outside as well. The whole study dwells on these three principles of how do we help create the best globality framework that places us in a position for success, how do we help earn our way into culture, and how can we have ways to build creative that actually travels. And take this away. If you want to take a screenshot of this, do. And if not, we'll email it to all of you. But this is really our point of view over here, that we believe that brands have entered an era of deep globality, which is really the awareness and the intent to spread something meaningfully but also enrich those that are receiving it. One final thought to leave you with.
So, as we conducted the research, we entered into homes across the world, and we met some truly global citizens, people who have moved far from their host countries and are living in foreign countries. And some things that we noticed about them is the first thing is that they turned out to be really fascinating, interesting, and generous individuals who shared a lot of their history and story with us. And from those stories, we learned that they were really respectful and of their host country, but really rooted in their identity, their home identity. So at the same time, they were understanding how they could both give and learn based upon these two identities. And so not only were they fascinating, they were respectful, but we also noticed that in each home that we entered, they cleaned up for us, so they keep things really tidy, and they always had very great stories to share with us, and really welcoming in that regard. So it occurred to us, what if brands were to think about themselves as the world's best house guests too? What if they use this house guest model as a way of thinking about the ways in which they enter into people's lives and homes? So that's it for our Truth About Global Brands presentation today. We thank you for your attention. Of course, as we mentioned, there's huge amounts of data behind all of this. We have workshops and tools, so you can talk to us or talk to anybody in your agency about getting closer up into category knowledge or audience knowledge. But we want to take a moment and just thank you for your attention and then hand the floor over and some questions perhaps.
Yeah. We would love to take some questions if you